Here at FIU. I'm very grateful to be here tonight, and I'm very grateful for your presence as well. As you know, this has been a very difficult and tragic week here at the university and in Miami. So I want to especially thank you for coming here and joining with us. Before we get started, I would love to take a few moments and take some deep breaths and get ourselves centered. Put your feet on the floor. And as we become more and more present, I would ask that you send some prayers and some compassionate, loving thoughts to the victims of the bridge collapse and their families. Thank you. During difficult times, it's important to be extra kind and compassionate to one another and to ourselves. And we've all been through a big shock, and it will definitely take some time for us to process all these intense emotions that we've experienced in the community. But I have faith in our resilience and our ability to heal. And coming together tonight is a good step in that direction. We can find comfort in one another, and tonight's topic is very timely. We will be exploring humanity's need for purpose and meaning, and the relationship between meaning making and our overall physical, mental, psychological, and spiritual well-being. We will look at our current collective situation and how being bombarded with so much violence and suffering has been impacting us, as well as how we might start to make inner changes that can shift our own state of consciousness in beneficial and healing ways. So tonight our speaker is Dr. Paul Canale of the Evolutionary Healing Institute here in Miami. And he's been involved in the study of the human condition for over 30 years. He was a pioneer in the biopsychosocial model of disease and suffering, and the intergenerational effects of toxic stress and trauma, especially how toxic stress and trauma affect the brain and the body. Dr. Canale is credited with pioneering somatic brain-body therapies, including many terms that are often used today in the fields of medicine, psychology, particularly those related to the autonomic nervous system regulation. Dr. Canale represents a new rare breed of physicians. He's a physician healer, which is a physician who is very versed in the mind, science, and psychology of human beings, but also has developed something else, something more mysterious and unexplainable, a way of connecting and knowing that gives him abilities and that exceed traditional logic and reason. He is a rare blend of spiritual sensitivity and knowledge of heart and mind. And I'm very honored to call him a friend, and I'm very excited to hear what he has to share with us this evening. So please help me welcome Dr. Paul Canale.
Thank you. Good evening. You know, I got a call, after the tragedy with the bridge, like, do you still want to go forward? Do you still want to do this? And there wasn't even a second thought in my mind. It was absolutely, because this is the message that we all need to hear at this time, and then what to do about it. And understand, in a world where there's so much going on, there's so much challenge, it seems to be one thing after another. What are we going to do? What has really been proven now? Like, we really have an understanding about what to do, because there's so many things out there and it's confusing. But if we kind of put things together in a unified way, and we look at what this person has and this person has to say, we eventually come to a sort of a common truth, and we want to share that today with you. So, like I said, even that statement, it's just confusing to me. Without purpose, life has no meaning. Without meaning, life has no purpose. We'll get to that, but think about it. It's one of those things, right, that you have to sit there and contemplate. But basically, it's been an age-old search. What is the meaning of life? What is the meaning of life? And with that, do I have a purpose? What is my purpose? How do I fit in? And the two of them are very much interchangeable, because when you really get the bigger mystery of the meaning of life, you start to see where your purpose is. And always somehow in that purpose, it involves some type of service. Some type of service to share that knowledge or wisdom of what you attained with others. Right? It's across the board. If you see people that set out, they always come to this place of realization, but they can't seem to contain that information for themselves. They want to go out and share with others. People have different interpretations. Deirdre Hay is a very fascinating and teacher and sort of prophet and spiritual teacher at the time, but she says that it's simply an embodiment of beauty, inner beauty. This inner beauty allows you to see, allows you to become clairvoyant, allows you to know, allows you to care, allows you to love, and allows you to receive love. It sounds really good. It sounds really good, but how do you actually get there? A big difference, right? Shelby Steele. He said basically his purpose is to realize himself, to live the fullest possible life, and he's responsible for this, like all men. This is a very important line, regardless of how society treats him. We'll look into that. So, outer world has been hitting us left and right. I have not in my entire life seen so much challenge, right, in the last few years. Some of those hurricanes, fires, floods. The other shooting was the Pulse nightclub, remember that? The bridge, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas recently, right? And what do you see? You see so much, it's like people can't contain, they don't have skills to deal. You see violence, depression is skyrocketing, anger and rage left and right. Questions, uncertainty, abuse. Recently with the Me Too movement, that was very exciting. That all of a sudden you start to see a lot of these voices coming up, talking about something that's been going on from age immemorial, but nobody was discussing it. But I tell you, that level of abuse, when you start to really see what's going on, is so prevalent in our society, in our world, it's unimaginable. And it can affect everything we do. And a lot of times that abuse sits there dormant, and then another event begins to trigger it, and the person doesn't even know what's happening to them. They're all of a sudden feeling lots of anxiety or depression, but they got triggered by something. Addiction. I don't know if any of you have seen hey Pete, there he is. So the latest statistics on addiction are staggering. Never in the history, even close to this country or anywhere else, maybe Hong Kong with the British with the opium, has there ever been such a rise in addiction? Across the board, 30%. If you go to middle America, Iowa, Nebraska, where there's a lot of despair, etc., not picking on those places, statistics are up 70%, 100%. 100%. And I'll tell you, the most basic premise behind every single addiction, yes, there's been more opiates. Yes, there's some very, very toxic drugs out there and so on. But if you know the secret of addiction, then you'll get what I'm talking about. So almost all addiction comes from two things. First is that the person has this feeling inside themselves, this very uncomfortable and often painful feeling, and they don't know what to deal with. So when they go in for the wisdom teeth, and the dentist gives them Oxycontin or an opiate, right, and they take that, you know what happens? They feel that bad feeling, leave them for a while, right? It's the first time they've never felt that bad feeling. That's the first. And the second is that when they take it, they feel the closest thing that they could ever describe, which is close to God. Believe it or not, you have to have a physical body. You have to have physical body. You have to have certain receptors to feel God, to feel ecstasy. And most of them will tell you when they first take that thing, it's the closest thing they've ever imagine, right? Because guess what? They never had a good feeling. Most people across the board have never had a feeling of connection. They've never had a feeling of being wanted. They never had a feeling of love, and they certainly didn't have a feeling like that. Rolling Stones, what's his name? Keith Richards. I'll never forget an interview. And they said, Keith, you know, you have a long history with drug use and abuse and everything. Is there anything you can say about it? He says, yeah, I missed that first time. There was nothing like that first time. There's nothing like that. You cannot describe it. I remember a recent documentary, award-winning documentary, and it was about addiction. It's specifically about a certain town in West Virginia that has the highest rate of deaths from addiction. Of course, with some of the, as you know, some of the new drugs. So in that, there's a woman that was going out and sacrificing herself. She had a very strong Christian background, and she would go out and try to help these people, try to get them into care, bring lunch, bring sandwiches in there. But there's one girl trying to describe what the feeling is, and she said, you know what it's like? You know what this addiction feels like? It's like you kissing Jesus. And she said, I got that. I got that. It would be like you being kissed by Jesus. Because to her, that was everything. Do you understand how intense it is? So we're going to go and explore, which I'm going to actually tell you, maybe one of the key secrets to breaking these types of things. We have to go back in time. We definitely have to look at the brain. You can literally study the history of humanity, and you will see that the rise and falls of civilizations had so much to do when they shifted from an outwardly or offensive, where they were trying to make war or acquire territory, or defensive, where they spent most of their time trying to protect themselves. So when humanity, say in the Renaissance, say even the Greeks, right, when they discovered democracy and all the arts and so on, when they stopped acquiring territory, militarization, or worried about protecting, they went inward. The shift in our humanity, the shift in our consciousness, is that we have to start putting more and more and more attention on the inward part, right? Okay, that's easy said. Where do you begin? What do you do? I mean, 99.9% everything we do is an external-based thing. It's work, it's entertainment, it's family, it's all kind of very basic survival stuff. We spend little or no time in that inner world. You know, there's a picture of this guy, right? You've seen him a bunch before, but his story, he was a real person. It's not some mythical person. And his story goes that he had everything. His dad gave him everything, including this pleasure palace where he could have anything he wanted, right? He actually built a part of the ground. I want you to have every pleasure possible. But even in that, even though acquiring all these things, he had this realization, man, I don't have any purpose and meaning. I'm very deeply unhappy. And he left the grounds. And what did he do? He actually put himself in very uncomfortable places. He sat there with a bunch of his buddies in this deer park, and they started to basically deprive senses, and they started to starve. And there's a famous statue, if you ever see it, of Buddha. It's just an amazing thing, a sculpture with all the ribs and bones and the veins coming out. But what changed all that? Because he was going to starve himself. He was like somebody with bulimia that could not see or stop what they're doing until they died, right? But there was a girl, an innocent girl, a sweet girl that came to him with no judgment and no criticism, and she offered him with incredible compassion this food, just simple food and rice. And in that moment, he realized something, what he was missing. In that moment, in the sweetness and the compassion, he had a realization that maybe I have to take the middle road. This extreme was was not it. And that I need to back off. And I need to work on the best part of human beingness is our connection and our compassion, which is in a big way what we've lost.
The mud came roaring in before sunup January 9th. Some residents of Montecito thought they were prepared.
Well, we sandbagged and put wattles down and all of that, prepared for a flood. That wasn't sufficient.
Not by a long shot. If that resident looks familiar, it may be because he's actor Jeff Bridges.
I started to shake like an earthquake, and then I heard my wife screaming and coming out of the bedroom holding our dog, and boom, here comes the mud.
Back across the highway, another team roams its grid, conducting secondary searches of homes, ensuring no one was missed. They're also documenting vehicles that were swept away by the mud and left on neighbors' properties. They found Jeff Bridges' SUV several homes away. Out of all this devastation, some are still able to find that silver lining in that dark cloud.
And so many people just pulling together, you know, these first responders. One of my lines from one of my movies comes to mind, Starman. He says, you know what I love most about you, humans.
At your very best when things are worst.
And that's certainly true.
In Montecito,
It's really caused a lot of love to bloom.
A lot of love to bloom. So out of tragedy, right, it's an opportunity. Out of loss, it's an opportunity. But how do you do that if you don't have resiliency? And how do you do that if you can't connect to some people that at least can hold it for you? And so, again and again, we're going to see that sometimes out of tragedy, it can mobilize us. Because a lot of times without pain, without suffering, without disease, without dire diagnosis, we don't get going, you know? We don't want to wait so long, though, next time, right? We want to start mobilizing. But look at this. Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, regardless of your position on gun control, whatever, is that these people actually got together. They found a purpose and meaning out of their suffering, and they passed something in almost a quarter of a century that no one has ever dared go against the National Rifle Association, this very powerful, controlling part of government, and they were able to get something done. That's a big deal. I remember, I think he's going to be here tonight. I think he was ill, but Jeff, he works he's an attorney, and he works specifically with this synagogue and so on. And he told me, he said, Paul, we mobilized people from the synagogue. We mobilized students. We drove 8 hours on a bus. Imagine that, with a bunch of kids, 8 hours to Tallahassee, and 8 hours back in the same day. And I said, Jeff, I really, really admire it. I admire that. That's really taking action, right? It's really doing something. So, historically, Asoka he's considered to be actually, of all the Indian kings, the greatest Indian king. Why? He had conquered almost the entire continent except for southern India. But after a massive battle, it said, more than 100,000 people dead, right? Asoka walked onto the battlefield, and amongst the moans and the cries and the pain and the suffering, he had a deep realization. And he was like, this is not the way. I've accomplished all of this for what? And he stood there and he renounced his throne for a while. And he said, I am going to find purpose and meaning. I'm going to go out and find truth. He just so happened found Buddhism and Jainism at that time, you know. But he spread goodness. It was no longer about consumption and offense. He spread goodness. And he became always remembered as India's greatest king. But only through deep darkness and despair. Now, a lot of people could lose it. A lot of people can go in. A lot of us give up, you know. But it's always an opportunity, and it's so important to have community and people that are supportive in understanding this process so you can help you get through. A lot of you might know Eckhart Tolle, but, you know, Eckhart Tolle he started at a very young age. I remember in his book he talked about 19 that he started to suffer depression, depression, anxiety, didn't understand it. But then he found somebody that he started to look up to. It was a professor at the university. He looked up to this guy. He really idolized this guy. Until one day he came, and he came to class. He said, where's Professor? He's dead. What happened to him? He took his own life. Now here's a guy that he looked up to. He idolized. On the surface, he looked a certain way. But inside there was a great turmoil. As many of us do feel, and many of us don't feel safe, or we can't communicate, or we can't express it, we've learned most of our lives to avoid and suppress. And so, but that was a catalyst to set him into motion, and he did the inner search. Now, I mean, that's a pretty intense inner search. He spent months and months, they say a year or more, in isolation, sitting on a park bench, right? But somehow, out of all of that, there was an awakening. Did he find that awakening under a stone? Did a pigeon fly in with a little message and he read that? No. Did somebody give him, did he take a certain drug? No. What happened? Something inside. That's what I want to say to you. There's a certain area of information that is stored in almost all of us. And if we can access that, it can give us some of the missing pieces that we need to have. Another one, Jill Bolte Taylor was the consummate neuroscientist, basically kind of left brain, very analytical, not very social, not having a lot of friends, very isolated into her work. And then, boom, she has a massive stroke on the left side of her brain, I mean, really bleeding, life-threatening condition. But something happened extraordinary. Something happened. Maybe it was the consummate scientist because somehow she didn't necessarily panic over a situation, and she began to watch her situation. And because the left brain, now maybe because the left brain was incapacitated, she was forced to use this right brain more. You heard the right brain's more sensing and feeling. Well, today in neuroscience, it's not so much like that anymore. But for our argument, because a bunch of the brain does all kinds of fascinating things. But for our argument, she was forced to go into this other part, and she noticed things she couldn't notice before. She can notice when somebody came in to the room, because she's in a hospital bed, she couldn't speak, but she could notice that some people were givers. And she's like, what did you mean by that? Well, when they come in, the way they would look at me or touch me or treat me, they almost like gave me energy. And other people, like often a lot of times the doctors, just looked at me like a sack of potatoes, right? And something came out of it. But eventually she discovered something which is absolutely part of the new understanding, that emotions are energy and feelings in your body. And there is a specific part of your brain that can develop that. And it's like she said, watch, I thought it was interesting that I could feel when a new emotion was triggered. I could feel new emotions flood through me and then release me. Joy was a feeling in my body. Peace was a feeling in my body. Why is that so important? Because if you can feel it, you can reproduce it. If you can feel something, you can reproduce it. If you can't feel it, if you're just lost in thought, you can't reproduce it. See what I'm saying? And in the same way, anxiety is epidemic. I mean, there is not a day in my office when somebody doesn't come in with different types of anxiety or panic attack. The big deal is now we've got so many children, 8, 9, 10, because of all the stresses. The good news is also it's 100% treatable, and there's a certain way to do it and release it, so we don't have to become dependent on different types of medications or anything else. There's a real way by learning how this moves in the body and how energy moves in the body. Another one. These are all very popular speakers out there, but they earned it the hard way. Byron Katie became severely depressed in her early 30s. For almost a decade, she spiraled down, suicide, self-loathing, despair. I mean, and then one moment in 1986, she experienced a life-changing realization. She realized that what had been causing her depression was not the world around us, again, not the world outside, but the world inside and how she perceived it, right? And that's basically, I mean, this brain in your senses is just collecting data and it's making assessments and perceptions about it. So if the software is off, you're going to continually see or reproduce the world in a certain way. Andrew Newberg, MD, and he said, it's very interesting. He says, if we aren't aware, don't believe that even enlightenment, okay, what is enlightenment? We're talking about enlightenment. We're talking about a superconscious state, or Stanislav Grof would call non-ordinary state. A non-ordinary state, it's not a state that you're normally used to. That it starts off as a subtle, it's sort of a subtle feeling, a subtle neurological feeling. And if you're not taught to recognize that, guess what you do? You push it out just like everything else, or you ignore it. But once you begin to train with it, you can realize, ooh, that's what that is. I'm going to run with this. This could really lead me to something. Einstein. I mean, everyone knows Einstein, but I always love this saying that he says. He said that the intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is a faithful servant. We have created a society that honors the servant and forgotten the gift. It's notorious. Alicia, what's that friend of yours that wrote the book about Einstein? He just wrote the one about Isaacson. She knows, what's his first? Walter Isaacson. Very famous author. He's popular now with, he wrote a book on Da Vinci, but he also wrote a book on Einstein. And he talked about in that book, too, that when Einstein would get stuck, right, he couldn't figure out for the life of him what was going on, take out his violin, and he'd get lost in the violin, and he'd go into the music and the vibration, and out of that, the secrets of the universe began to be revealed. The secrets of the universe by shifting perspective. He knew the secret of shifting perspective. And he realized, wow, how little we learned, how little we know how to use that, how little we don't trust it anymore, how little when we don't feel something like we get something we don't like, we distract ourselves. We distract ourselves. We distract ourselves. We distract ourselves. We don't know that they may be absolutely necessary to get to the next step, and we haven't had the support. So we're really big on creating it so people start to learn the other way. Neuroplasticity is very exciting. So with the age of neuroscience, they realize an amazing thing that you can actually resculpture and change your brain. And it started a long time ago with this neuroscientist called Richie Davidson. Richie Davidson asked the Dalai Lama if he could bring up his imaging equipment and look at monks' brains, you know. And first the Dalai Lama said yes. So, you know, it's up in northern India and it's way up high, Dharamsala. So he hired all these porters and they lugged all that stuff up there. They get to the top, they're already set up, and the Dalai Lama says, changed my mind. So a lot of guys would have given up, right? But he said, I'm not giving up. He said, you know what? You can do the tests down on the mainland. This is sacred ground. When they did the test, something that sparked a lot of this inquiry started. They saw that the monks' brains were different than most anybody else's brain. Well, what the heck? Because as a scientist and a doctor, we thought, well, everybody basically has the same brain, you know, and the mind is just what you have, but not that by using your mind in a different way, you could literally change your brain. And that's what they found out. The monks clearly were using their different practice than you or I do every day, and it shaped their brain differently. And the part that it shaped differently was this called the middle prefrontal cortex. And that turns out to be the ticket out of hell, which is what we're going to talk about more. Oh, this is important before I forget, is that to change the brain, listen to this one, we must interrupt and inhibit procedural patterns and experiment with new kinds of sensory stimulation. Sensory, not thinking stuff, sensory stimulation is what interrupts these patterns, right? It breaks up the pattern. We're going to explain how does that work. Sensory in the body, sensory in the outside. Sensory. The brain thrives on sensory to disrupt cognitive function to open up another door. So here's the big part of the brain. That one is the ticket out of hell. You see the one right there? That. It's called the middle prefrontal cortex. And it doesn't even get fully developed into your 20s or 30s, right? So, that's why a lot of teenagers and college students a lot of times don't necessarily always have the vision necessary to see ahead, and don't always see the consequences of their actions. But as this part develops, it gives you insight and foresight. But one of the most important things is this, emotional regulation. So that means we don't have such overwhelming days. There's no such thing as a terrible day. There's no such thing as emotional explosion. There's no such thing as all of a sudden just breaking out in rage and doing something out of control. It's a fascinating thing when human beings realize, wow, you can pick and choose feelings and emotions, just like Jill Bolte Taylor. But you got to earn that thing. Nobody gets a free ride on that. There is finally a certain way to understand it. Response flexibility, that means, in a difficult situation or challenging situation, you recover. Empathy, mindsight. When they say a person's empathic, this really is such a thing. There really is such a thing where a person, boy, I really felt this or I noticed that. But it causes, you actually have to develop a certain part of your brain to do that. Insight, self-knowing. That's what we're looking for today, right? Knowing thyself, purpose and meaning. That exists right up in there. Fear modulation. Oh my God, if there's one emotion that has stopped me in my life, and I bet you most of the people in here, is fear. Fear of something. Fear of failure. Fear of doing. Fear of this. Fear of that, right? So there's a part of the brain called the amygdala. Actually, there's two of them, part of the limbic system. They sit on each side. And the key of that thing is to quell that fire, because that reptilian brain, that fear center, boy, once it's out of control, like I said, anxiety, I know how many people, I don't even have to ask you, this room, are suffering from anxiety, and then the acute is panic attack. But get this, the same thing that creates anxiety can go in another pathway and then end up in your back pain. You realize acute back pain, neck pain, all that is this fear causing contraction inside the body. Migraines, stomach disorders, because the way it inhibits other processes in your body. So intuition, morality, what do you see so often? Like you said, people don't really have a sense. There's no sense of good. There's no sense of purpose, especially when you're bombarded in a world that we have been in lately. So, psychopharmacology. So psychopharmacology is taking some type of substance and being able to change the mind. Now, we know psychopharmacology when it comes to antidepressants, right? Antipsychotic things, stimulants. But now this is really wild. This whole other area is starting to open up, even in traditional medicine. And it works on a completely different way, because when you're talking about psychopharmacology, you're talking about the experience, not the drug. So what does that mean? Right? So what does that mean? For instance, maybe you've seen New York Times yesterday or this week, or CBS Sunday Morning this week. They had people on there that had intractable depression, they had cancer, no other treatment worked, and they put them on psilocybin, which is a mushroom, right? And the mushroom has this particular substance in it. And the one session, now they're working with somebody, they're integrating the information. It's so important. What we're talking about is information that comes up to the person that was not available before, and it changes their life, right? As opposed to, you're feeling anxiety, depression, I'm going to give you something to quell the symptom. It's a different world. And so the shock was, again, wow, these people have a realization about something in their life, and they begin to wake up. Also in medicine, you can Google it. I mean, just in our area, you'll see ketamine clinic. What's ketamine? You know, ketamine used to be very popular in South Florida as a club drug because of the effects that people would get with it. Ketamine is the most widely used excuse me, my mind went blank.
Pediatric.
Anesthetic. It's a dissociative anesthetic. So it's used in medicine all the time because it doesn't depress respiratory function. It's used in veterinary medicine. Well, if you go to India, they don't use the SSRIs, they don't use those kinds of things. They'll give the person a ketamine and at a higher dosage, and this person has this whole experience. They get to see things in their life, pieces that were missing, and they pop out of it. Now, here in the U.S., like I said, you will see various ketamine clinics, right? They use it for pain now. They use it for depression and anxiety. They do infusions. It's lower dose, right? But sometimes what happens is it basically kind of kicks, if we get stuck in a loop, sometimes it kicks the person out of the loop. But the thing that they don't talk about so much is that the person has an experience of self that they didn't have before. And in that experience of self, they move out. Now, at higher dosages, you'll see there's a clinic in New Jersey. There's an amazing woman that does work out west. They pick it up at a higher dose, and this person has this whole wonderful experience about their life. And she's able to work with the therapist in a totally different way. And it's quite amazing. Now, I know there's a few people here, and also myself, have participated in that world, in the shamanic practices. So shamanic practices don't necessarily have to involve psychotropics, but it's all over the place. In any city, almost in this country, on any given day, you're going to see somebody participate in the shamanic practices using substances like ayahuasca. They may use peyote, they may use other things, substances, even Bufo alvarez, a toad, a desert toad. They squeeze the back of the toad. It has the secretion. But the most amazing thing about that toad, it has a 5-MeO DMT receptor, which is the exact receptor you need in your brain to open up that door of consciousness. Go figure, that toad that spends 9 months of the year underground, doesn't come out into the rain, but that little bit somehow can cause this trigger, and it's been used like in Mexico and other people to help people out of depression, help people out of addiction. Amazing. Message is, there's a whole lot of stuff inside. I'm not pushing any way, shape, or form psychedelics on you, but I'm saying as a whole, which the point is that there's a level of information that lies generally below our consciousness, and if we access it with the right people and the right help, it could be very beneficial. How many people know this guy? My wife's always like, I love his shows. Who knows Hamilton Morris, Psychotropic? Yeah. He's an amazing character. I love him. He's a kind of a chemist by trade. He's a funny guy, and he travels all over the world studying these things, and he's fascinated, too, of how they affect their brain, you know, and how different people use it to create a positive outcome. A little story of note. So years ago, I started to have a lot of different people come to me. Now, normally people may come to me, they have anxiety, right? They have physical pain, they have some incurable neurological condition, they have depression. Because of the way we work with the brain, we offer new hope. But I had a lot of people coming to me, and I said, why are you here? Well, I was told to come to you, Dr. Paul, because I am participating in a lot of these shaman things, and I'm doing ayahuasca almost every other week. And I was told to come to see you, that you were the person to see in between. Oh, okay. I'll go with it. I'm a consummate, I've spent most of my life, I'm always interested in wisdom and knowledge. And so I look at it, okay, let me study these people, because traditionally those types of substances were used very infrequently. So if you go to Peru or some of these indigenous countries, they weren't going to be doing it every other week, right? It'd be some people, it was a rite of passage once in your life, right? Or very infrequently. This was happening every other week. So I, again, as an investigator, I wanted to know, was this having a positive outcome in these people? Was it having a negative income in these people? And they were creating a new type of shamanic practice. It no longer was in the jungle. It wasn't sitting there. It was in penthouses, sitting on Miami Beach on the water with fancy setups and all kinds of sensory stuff and DJ with special music. And I mean, like, okay. So I actually had to go and see for myself. Was there positive outcomes? Yes, I saw certain people that one session, they really moved through the anxiety. But I saw after a period of time, people plateaued. They did not get any more information after a certain point, right? And then, as I saw that person, we figured out why. Because there were certain, what we call implicit memories, often due to earlier experiences in their life that could not be processed in that situation, right? Often very toxic or stressful, and it needed to be done one-on-one, right? And it needed to not be done on that influence. So a lot of times I'd have people that went for a year, in a matter of 2 or 3 treatments, they were integrated. I didn't say you never go back again. I just said, I think you better take a different route, you know? In my own way, I actually had experienced these things over many years, and I would always get to the place, Paul, you got your information, get the heck out of here. That's what I'd hear. And if you do come back, it's not even going to work for you. And it's true. And so I really got that. So over 10 years or more, I've had some experience with it, but I don't want to tell anybody about anything if I don't have a direct experience around it. Do I feel it has a place? Absolutely. But is it, unfortunately today, because people are so often lost in their purpose and meaning they're looking, it's way overdone. You hear what I'm saying? It's way, way overdone. But it definitely can have a place, and it needs to be studied more. So, beliefs, anticipation, and ritual. It's very fascinating, because you wouldn't believe how much an anticipation of an event or a ritual. Now, I often told people when they come to me, you're going to say, how is this possible? You're going to think that somehow what I'm doing, that I gave you a drug, right? Or that there's a secret gas under the table because you are having one of these extraordinary experiences. We are accessing information inside them that they weren't used to, right? And they laugh at first, and then it starts to happen. And then I say, listen, we have to proceed slowly. We have to stop and go, just like exercise, until you feel comfortable for this information. This is interesting. People that had participated in previous sermonic practices, it was a lot easier to access them, right? Because something had shifted. Wow. It turns out one of my heroes is Fabrizio Benedetti from Turin, Italy. He's a neuroscientist, but I consider him like this wizard or shaman today because Fabrizio has discovered some amazing things. So watch this. You come to the hospital, right? You're in pain. And I say, okay, I'm going to give you an opiate for that pain, right? I give you that opiate for the pain, and there's a predictability of how that pain is going to come out. Usually a certain dose, say morphine. Let's take morphine. It'll last about an hour and a half. But there's a large group of people, as you know, and they tend to be more positive as opposed to pessimistic, that are what we call placebo responders, right? So I give you the exact same drug. You will have a response. Now, it may not, often when studied, it's not as strong as the real drug, but it will block the pain nonetheless. It won't last as long. The drug will last an hour and a half. The placebo may last 45 minutes, okay? But this is the freaky thing. In a medicine today, the discovery that goes on across the board. So watch this. We can take Parkinson. Parkinson is a neurodegenerative condition. It's the degeneration of the brain, right? Now, Fabrizio, I mean, I don't know where they get these people to sign up for this, but they put a wire through the brain into the part of the brain, the gasoganglion, or the substantia nigra. It's not working, right? So the treatment is, you ever know anybody with Parkinson, they have sort of a cogwheel rigidity. It's very difficult to move. So Fabrizio will do things like, okay, we're going to turn the electric on. It's going to inhibit those neurons inside that brain that are misfiring. And sure enough, when they turn the electric on, the person moves normally. But then he tells the same person, electric on, and electric's not on. They do the exact same thing. You can repeat that with a drug. You know, certain drugs that produce dopamine in that, right? You give a person dopamine, you measure it through the wire, you see the activity, you take away the actual drug, same thing. But watch this. Ritual anticipation. Now, people have certain anticipations when you go to the emergency or hospital. Now, in a hospital setting, you have certain expectations. You see the monitor, right? The vital monitor, boop, 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 boop. The doctor comes in, the nurse comes in a certain way. I deliver a medication, I expect a certain result. If I deliver that medication and I take away all the ritual, I take away the jackets, I take away the monitors, I take away that, but I administered a drug through a computer, guess what happens? The drug doesn't work. So we start, whoa. In almost every aspect of our lives, rituals really matter, right? And beliefs matter. Problem is there's a thing called a nocebo, right? And a nocebo is a negative anticipation about things, right? And how many of us get stuck in a negative anticipation? In the brain, it still generates negative chemicals. And get the wildest thing of all. The placebo activates the same pathway as the drug. So you'd say, wait a minute, the placebo is supposed to be a fake treatment. Fake treatment, yes, but not in the brain, it's not. Because if I gave you a pain pill for an opiate, the morphine pathway, the mu receptor, right? The placebo does the exact same thing. Whoa. So the reason I'm telling you this, like, we got to rethink about who we are and what we are and what capacity. Because if we start putting more attention in that, you get to that pharmacy, you just think what you can do. I mean, check it out sometime. I'll show you the next slide because that's from Fabrizio's program. But basically, he says acupuncture, that's the shaman down, massage, surgery. In every one of those cases, you can play with the placebo. Now watch this. You take people that don't respond to placebos, right? No matter what you do. Those people tend to they don't respond to many treatments in general, right? So you have people that don't respond. Again, so on day one, you have the non-responders, you have normal people, and you have placebo responders. Put them all together. Day one, you give them morphine. Day two, you give them morphine. Day three, you give them morphine. Day 4, you give them placebo. Everybody responds, including the non-responders. There's an anticipation and ritual. We have to be so careful of how we get programmed into anticipation and ritual because we literally will recreate our reality over and over again. Consciousness, the body, and the brain. It turns out that especially we live in such a stressful and toxic environment, it accumulates. It's called the allostatic load. One of the biggest things that we're working at the H Institute is across the board. Whether it's doctors or healthcare providers, or whether it's teachers, whether it's students, anyone must learn how to reset because the system has a reset button. You're going to see, with some hesitancy, I'm going to show you a little film of somebody resetting itself automatically. But what happens is toxic stress. The biggest toxic stress is what we're going to go into. Is yes, it's happening now, but your ability to determine your resiliency was determined a long time ago. Especially, it depends when you experience it, but the earlier you experience it, the more it sets you up for life changes. So extraordinary was this study. It was from the Center for Disease Control. Everybody heard of that? It's one of the largest studies they've done. It by far is the most controversial, right? It's very hard to digest. They recommend that every physician in America take an ACE score every time you walk through the door. I'm the only guy that I know of in South Florida that takes that ACE score and makes a clinical judgment, and it's very significant to me. But what does it mean? What is an ACE score? So we're going to watch a little movie about what we're talking about, and then we'll go into it from there.
We all like to think of childhood as this time of joy and innocence. But, I mean, for many of us, it's just not true.
When you grow up in these type of situations, it's not something you talk about. I know I did.
The
first thing that we find is that adverse childhood experiences are common.
Kids are young, they don't know what's going on, they won't remember anyway. Well, the child may not remember, but the body remembers.
There was this incredible gee whiz effect. You mean adverse childhood experiences cause heart disease and lung disease and liver and cancer?
Exposure to trauma affects children's developing brains. The impact is on your behavior, it's on your heart, it's on your DNA. Like, how do you deal with all that?
Don't reach out when we used to.
We have a whole new body of knowledge now that could open up what we have up till now been seen as intractable, unsolvable problems.
No child should be punched or kicked.
If you can get the science into the hands of the general population, they will invent very wise actions.
Do you feel like any of the interventions have been making a difference?
They made all the difference in the world.
It's there, it's possible, and a defeatist attitude is completely disconnected from what 21st century science is telling us, and we should be going after that like a bear.
New model of the nature of human disease and suffering. So much of that starts very early, and it has so much to do with how we treat ourselves. And it's intergenerational. What does that mean? A couple years ago, I was on a plane to LA with Dr. Stacy, and a woman got out of her seat, and she came over. She says, "Hi, I'm so-and-so," and she was a designer for a lot of Hollywood stars and clothes, and she said, "You're Dr. Paul Canale." "Yes, I am." She said, "Would you be interested in working with Holocaust survivors?" And I thought, what is she talking about? Many of these people, of course, are in their 80s and 90s, And she said, no. She saw where I was going. She said, no, the grandchildren. At that time, it made me think. I knew where I was headed and what I was looking at, and I thought, maybe. But since that time, the research is absolutely conclusive. So how could somebody's grandmother or even great-grandmother affect, why is the children have more anxiety, more depression, more sense of hopeless, struggling in their life? Because it's very simple. After you traumatize somebody, right? You know what happens? They shut down, they become numb. They lose their ability to give, they lose their ability to receive. They lose their ability to be present, they lose their ability to feel, right? And so now, they don't want to pass it down, but you can count on that all of a sudden there would be outbursts of rage and anger and violence. You see what I'm saying? Sometimes they just wouldn't be there. Because you don't necessarily have to have a violent parent or angry parent, but a parent that's not there, not connecting, just as bad. Just as bad. So it's amazing when we see, wait a minute, this intergenerational thing, the amount of abuse and sexual abuse. When I go to third world countries, because I know the things to look at, I'm spending some time in the Dominican Republic, it's almost impossible not to find a girl that hasn't had some level of abuse. It's almost impossible. We have a society have to step up and see what the hell we've been doing. Because what we have now is a result of mistreatment of the patient. As a physician, I have to look at something. Okay, you got a fever, 100, you got a productive cough, you got a rash, and then you make a diagnosis. You have the flu, you have an upper respiratory infection, right? What's happening right now? We are the patient, the world is the patient, the nation is that we are very, very, very ill. This is a turning point. You have to turn. You have to look at, the science is undeniable, but you need real cues. You need real skills. I hope I get some of you excited to even start looking at that and even developing levels or careers or something that you want to make a damn difference in the world. Because nobody escapes it. By by avoiding and ignoring and putting down, it's only a matter of time. Because maybe people didn't tell you, but life does not end happily ever after if you do not get that inner game. If you do not get that inner game, I don't care who you are, it is not going to end happily ever after. Because that's a misunderstanding. So let's make it simple. We somehow go into the survival mode. It shuts down awareness. But mostly it shuts down communication. So you can't feel disease. You can't feel things creeping up. You can't feel things happening to you. And all of a sudden it gets out of control. This is an interesting thing. So the discovery is we have this wonderful system, the autonomic nervous system. Why the heck is that so important? Because it affects every darn cell in the body. That's a good place. And it always is moving energy, and it's very basic. It has two components. It has a sympathetic, which is energy expenditure. So when this thing goes off, you borrow money from the bank. That's working out. That's excitement, but it's also fear. It's survival. It's like your heart races, but at the same time, it shuts down your digestive tract. Well, why would it shut down your digestion? If you're under stress, why would it shut down your digestive tract? Because nature really is, and evolution has learned a lot about survival, and it says, I am not going to waste any energy on digesting food, by the way, that takes a lot of energy. When, if you don't get your butt out of here, that big cat over there, it's going to digest us. You get that part? So if you're getting in that stress response, one of the first thing is we develop a lot of GI tract disorders. The counter for that is this guy. This is parasympathetic, cranial nerve 10, the vagus nerve, longest nerve in the body. That's all about tell me it's safe. Tell me it's safe to sleep. Tell me it's safe to digest. Tell me it's safe to eat. Tell me it's safe to love again. Tell me it's safe. Tell me it's over. What happens? You get stuck here. You know, every once in a while, because of the work we've done, we've been to Fort Carson and Colorado Springs is PTSD, you know? And Pete, with his military career, he's seen enough of that. But what is that? It means post-traumatic. So you mean, so after the problem, you have a problem? Yeah. And most people, believe it or not, have some degree of it. But basically what happens with that is that they get themselves up, they're doing things, they're on high arousal, they're borrowing money, because you borrow energy from the bank. This is catabolic. This will break down your immune system. This will break down your tissue. It elevates cortisol. Cortisol will lower your mast cells that scoop up cancer every day. So long term, it's not so good. Because you have these things called these NK killer cells, and they go around like pack up. Oh, you don't belong there. Guess what happens under elevated stress? They start going down. So you could see tumor. Insulin becomes insensitive. You have plenty of insulin, type 2 diabetes starts showing up because you have the insulin. It becomes insensitive. It demineralizes the bone. In the beginning, it's very protective, but it's like you better slow down. You better connect. Interesting. One of the fathers of stress research is Sapolsky at Stanford. You know, famous book, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. One of the things that he discovered that I always loved is that he'd spend his summers in Africa studying baboons, right? And he said, you know, baboons do three things. They eat, they have sex, and they groom. And without any of those, if you took one of those things, they would fall out. So what's the grooming part? Baboons can be very aggressive, especially with other males coming into the pack, into the troop, I think they call it. And they get these elevated stress wounds. And then the lower ones are always being picked on by the upper ones, etc. But the thing that stabilizes the entire troop is, let me borrow Amy here, is a sensory-based stimulation. They spend most of their day, if you watch them, they're going like this. That touch, that simple touch re-regulates that system. That's nature designed it that way. And if they don't get it, the whole thing falls apart. Isn't that fascinating? But see so what are you talking about? What type of touch? What type of sensory stimulation? What? It has to be very specific. And when you're in survival, sensory stuff doesn't even get through. You know, it's like meditation. Try to meditate and you're in that place. What are you talking about? Because you're developing in your brain when we do an EEG of the brain, electroencephalograph, you see that you generate what's called a beta wave. And the beta wave is the conscious state. Alpha wave is meditating. But what two things most meditators do? They're either think they're meditating, but their mind's or they're asleep, which is a delta wave. You know, they're out cold. And they think that's meditation. That is not what meditation is about. Meditation is supposed to develop the frontal cortex, and you're supposed to start gathering information in that world, you know? You have to stop by just focusing on sensory-based stimulation. It shuts down, and then it happens. But you can't get there when you're in survival. So one of the things we pioneer, we want to teach people is all across the nation, there is a way to quickly turn a person's survival. It changes the brainwave pattern. They go into this deep restorative place. Sleep deprivation is epidemic. No matter what you have, if you don't get proper sleep, your body's going to break down. This is when the repair happens. This is when the growth over. You know how much of we can't go to sleep. Why? Because we're taking our problems with us. And even worse, the problems in the past are getting triggered. You know, most people that have a memory of sexual abuse, it's not because they all of a sudden just have a memory. They're in a theater. They're watching a movie as something about it, right? I remember a fellow had come to me, and he had a job at the Breakers, and he told me this story. He said, Dr. Paul, got to share this story with you. Now, I was in a movie once, and I was watching this particularly violent movie, and I was okay with that, but what I was not okay with is when I looked over, there was a man with a young boy, and the boy was having such a time with the violence. He was in a lot of pain, and the man was oblivious to his needs, you know. I wanted to go over there and say something. I wanted to save that boy. I wanted to take him out. But what it did, it triggered his own inner boy, right? And that night, he had terrible dreams. And that next night, anxiety, terrible anxiety. And he started to fall into depression, and then memories started to memories about his uncle who had sexually abused him. So he came to me and he said, Dr. Paul, I heard about you. I'm going to come to you. I had initially a very good psychotherapist that had helped me, an older man, but he's passed, and I don't have anybody. I just heard about you, and I heard about the work you do. Can you help me? So I explained to him about what we do, and I explained, like he said in the movie, that most of the stress and trauma is where? In the body. We need the brain, we need the mind, but you've got to put the two together. You've got to put the two together if you're going to get out, because it is held in the body. And so this is one of the times, usually you have to be very careful with people. Is this okay? Is that safe? Is that okay? You want to know the boundaries if you make any particular contacts. You know, most people, not such a big problem. Other people, especially if there's been some abuse, you have to watch where you're going to contact. Well, this time I didn't, and I usually try to comfort people by making a light contact here, or ask for permission. I didn't, and I went like that, and he jumped up, and he said, nobody, damn it, nobody does that to me. Nobody touched me. Obviously, way more than what was appropriate for the situation. Just the way I have many mothers come into me and they say, Dr. Paul, you got to help me. My husband and my child, I don't know what to do. I just bust out in such rage. I'm hurting my child. I'm hurting my husband. It's not because of that situation. It isn't because he didn't clean the dishes. Maybe. I'm in the dishwasher. I'm looking at my wife. But anyway, it's way more than the situation. So he jumped off the table, and I said to him, listen to me. I am sorry for that. I'll be a lot careful. But I'm saying we're going to work on the day, because this is the same system that works exercise. It makes your heart go up and down. I said, we're going to work on the day. Now, with your permission, I'm going to touch that area. And instead of you going into rage, it's going to come out of your body. Your body might shake, you might tremble, you might laugh, you might cry, you might see different colors, but it's going to come out and you're going to go into the deepest state of peace you ever had. That's hard for me to believe, Dr. Canale. I said, let's train. So the day came, I said, here we go, you're ready, and I just went, whoop, and sure enough, this wonderful reaction happened where the autonomic nervous system reset itself and he reached that place. Next slide. How are we doing on time? Aaron?
20.
How much?
It's at 20 right now.
Okay. So it's important to realize this system it's basically a series of waves. So what happens is, when we get excited or when we exercise, what happens? The heart starts to go up, is an increase. If we get excited about something, even a continuation of the species would have never gotten where we are today if this wasn't possible, because this is sexual arousal. Because if we didn't have that, boy, who would want to mate for anything? It's messy, it's time-consuming, forget about it. So watch. This is important. But then what happens after? If you can think about that, there's this deep settling place, right? There's a deep peace. The secret is to increase this. Just like fitness. Man, I could only make it 15 minutes when I started. Boy, I just ran a half marathon. How is that possible? That's the system. So all energy works through the system. And so how many guys know this guy? Come on, Wim Hof, the Iceman. All right, very popular on YouTube. Check it out. So Wim Hof, he's a master of regulating the autonomic nervous system. Just look at it. You'll see so many YouTube videos. What I like about him, he's quite a showman. But he's gotten a lot, especially a lot of young people, to turn the way that they look at the world and say, wait a minute, I can regulate my own energy. I don't have to take these drugs. I don't have to do it. I can take a responsibility. Wim Hof showed science that what we thought that human beings were limited to was not true. So he did things like, he's famous for running up Kilimanjaros in his shorts, or running a marathon, or going into cold where no human being had possibly go before without going into hypothermia. And then at one university or medical hospital, they studied him to say, okay, big shot, let's see how you do with this. And they gave him an endotoxin. So bacteria is waste. So basically that's what makes us sick. Not necessarily the bacteria, but the poop, the waste. It's an endotoxin. So they said, okay, big shot, let's see what you do. They shot the endotoxin. Now, normally that's going to make you pretty darn sick, right? He was able to regulate that and not get those reactions. And so he has clinics. The point about it is that, again, it just sparks people about going in, developing tools, not to be so helpless, right, and to develop resiliency. So, like I said, YouTube filled with a bunch of videos about Wim Hof. Unified therapy, what we found is it's just a new way, it's a new operating system. What made Bill Gates into Bill Gates is that he found a new operating system to access something that was already there. So what I'm saying, we have an ability to access something that's there, access something that's already there, and utilize it in a different way. Homeostatic reflex. Okay, so get ready for something really weird, something you haven't seen before. The next guy, believe it or not, he's a multi-millionaire, big company, the CEO. And years ago, he called me up, and I was like, is this for real? Are you putting me on? He says, Dr. Canale, we've been watching what you're doing, and I'm very interested in your work. Okay, what's the sales pitch, right? No sales pitch. We want to come and see what you're doing. So who are you? To tell him his name is Bob Bennett. And he says that he buys and sells companies, and they had a bunch of teaching schools down here in Florida. He's from Utah, all over. He's big education, works with big Fortune 500 companies. But he has this vision that the biggest thing that stops these companies from advancing or profits go south, and they got a lot of data with it, is when the top people, the CEO and the executives, something goes wrong inside them. Not just physical things, but something happens. They get overwhelmed, right? And you see, all of a sudden you'll see as the guy, the ideas go away. He's left his wife. He's having affairs. He's doing this. The company goes down, right? They get overwhelmed. They have anxiety, have panic attack. And he said, boy, if we could get to the top executives, right, and we could teach them some of these secrets, because he's developed programs himself, we could really turn things around. In this country, in the world, there's job toxicity at the level of, in the workplace, is astronomical. Because people are so overwhelmed, you know what they do? Then they pass it down. If I'm abused, or if I'm angry, unfortunately, a lot of times we pass it right down, right? But, so he realized that this is a big thing. So he came like a couple weeks ago, and he was on the table, and I said, Bob, I want to try some. You mind it's going to be HIPAA compliant. that I can make a video of this thing that you're doing, because it's so specific. So Bob has a history of he was a competitive skier, racer, and so on, and he has multiple injuries to his lower legs. What you're going to see is an intelligent system all by itself, doing all the best rehab, the best muscle strengthening, the best of everything, all by itself. So it's a weird thing. He's not having a spasm. He's not having a seizure. I just want you to see what's possible in a nervous system that's evolved. So let's just see that.
Oh, my ankle.
What's happening with the ankle?
Oh, just when I sprained it sophomore year in high school.
So you're kind of re-experiencing those sensations?
Yeah.
And all the things that went on around that time? And you were saying with the knees too? You had 3 knee surgeries?
Yeah.
And you're re-experiencing some of the feelings and the sensation?
Yeah, and what it did. It didn't do. Brings you right back there, man.
That would sound pretty bad from the hallway. Oh, it is going to be strange.
What's happening now, Bob?
And just how that affected everything in my right knee. It led to my ACL ripping, tearing later. I know I had to wear tape on my ankle for like a year or two just to play soccer. Get all taped up.
Now what's happening? You feel calming down? Or
Yeah.
There's a quieting after.
Okay, that is not typical, but it's a good example. So energy, movement, exchange, and then the deep relaxation phase that happens after. And that's when healing takes place. The heart rate drops, the body drops, there's a dissipation. Like I said, I did that for effect. He's having an advanced system but you could see it's actually, there's an intelligent system. There's something in there that's doing it automatically. And that's quite fascinating. So, there's been a movement to develop what's called soft skills. James Heckman, another economist, won a Nobel Prize for economics, but had one of those epiphanies, and he said, you know what, the future of this country is dependent not on hard skills, like 2 + 2 is 4, or what is the square root of so-and-so, it's soft skills. And that we have to start teaching our children very early on, and other people, how to get inside if they're going to survive, right? If they're going to survive. The problem is, they don't always know what to do with it. Do we teach mindfulness? Do we teach them? How do we teach them to be able to develop the skills of resiliency? Well, today we're really beginning to understand that. You've got to re-regulate that autonomic. You've got to give them real cues. You have to tell them to allow this body, because the body will do it automatically, provided it's in a safe situation. Even in yoga, if there's anybody that does yoga, you ask the instructor if she's ever seen this. I'll give an example. Person's in a class, Usually in a class where the people may have been together for a few days, so they feel more comfortable, and the person's stretching, and say they've always had some chronic pain in their hip, they've had really bad menstrual cramps, all of a sudden, they start to feel something. Like Andrew Newberg said, it's a subtle thing at first, and then it's not so subtle. And they start to feel a movement. They start to feel heat. They start to temperature changes. They might get hot or cold. They start to feel a shaking or trembling. And a lot of times there's an emotion. It's like a movie. I tell people, don't make a big deal of that. Because it's like a movie. You go to a movie and you feel no emotion, that movie's what? Terrible. But if that movie, hey bro, I saw you crying. Oh man, it was a great movie. I'm angry, sad. Most of us are so afraid of experiencing it. It happens spontaneously. So in the class, all of a sudden, the emotions, the movement come out. And then there's this deep state of peace. And they say, oh my God, the pain is gone. And you know what? I realized something. I never was able to tell anybody until now the things that happened with my uncle. And I was able to process it. It's spontaneous. It's going to happen more and more as soon as we start recognizing that it even does exist. Connection. You know, in psychotherapy, there's almost 200 different types of technique. And everybody is searching, well, which technique is better? Which one? And brave individuals started to look, and they found the most important thing. First, they called it the therapeutic alliance because it's more hard to figure out, but basically, it's a therapeutic relationship. Do you feel listened to me? Do you see me? Do you hear me? Are you connected with me? That's what's going to make the difference. Everybody stand up for a minute. Let's do this. We're going to do some. Amy, come over here so I'll demonstrate. Just sit there for a minute. We're going to do 10 consecutive breaths to generate a response to the autonomic nervous system. And then I'll go with it with you. I'm just going to turn after I breathe, and I'm going to look at her and just look in somebody's eyes and say, I see you and I feel you. And then the other person responds. Even just what I said, just even notice how it makes you feel. It's like interaction with somebody else. If it's somebody you know, it feels okay. But what about a stranger, right? So let's do it. We'll count them out. And the breaths are just in the nose, out the mouth, or in and out of the mouth, just to charge the system up. Okay, so here we go. Go. Ready? Faster. Yeah, in. 2, 3, 4, 5, deeper, really pull it up into the chest and heart. 6, 7, feel it. 8, 2 more, really pull it up. 2 more, 1 more, 9, 10. Turn to anybody next to you. Turn. See if you can touch hands. Just try it there. Perfect. Slow down. I see you. Really see the person. Don't rush. Slow down. And now, just notice how that feels. It's like that little bit to break that energy. That's part of that system, to break the energy. So, take a seat, and then the ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moment of comfort and convenience, but where he or she stands at time of challenge and controversy. And that's Martin Luther King. Now, I'm going to bring up Amy to make a little bit of a speech, and then Peter's going to come in, and then we'll close out. Go on, Steve.
Hello. I wish I would have worn heels. I'm going to be down here. I'll move our autonomic nervous system out of the way. I want to thank you all tonight so much for coming and being so open to learning about this process of healing and awakening, because it is so important for our society right now. So I'm going to share a little bit about how I used this system of healing to heal from a chronic illness. And then I also want to talk about something that happened, well, a few things that happened as a result of that healing, and I was not expecting, I was not looking for, and I certainly didn't even know at that time that it existed. The only thing that I was looking for when I met Dr. Paul about 8 years ago was for somebody to please take away this pain and fatigue that I was experiencing. I'd been suffering from chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia for the better part of 4 years. And it's the most debilitating illness. I don't know if anyone in here has experienced it, but I'm sure a lot of you probably know people who have. The pain was intense and it was all over my body. It was bad, but the fatigue was even more debilitating. And at the worst part of that 4 years, I can remember I would be laying on my bed or on the couch, and I would have to make a choice when I stood up because I didn't have enough energy to do the things I needed to do. So I would have to make a choice. I would say, okay, am I gonna get up and go to the kitchen and grab a handful of trail mix, or am I gonna go to the restroom? As I couldn't do both things. So I would do whatever was most pressing, and then I would lay back down for an hour or two before I had enough energy to get up and do the other thing. And I lived like that for a year. And I tried valiantly with everything I knew how to get better. I tried every doctor, of course, every specialist, every antiviral, everything from the outside that I could try to make myself better. And I remember firmly believing that the cause of my illness was a virus or a pathogen or some kind of chemical that some doctor with the right amount of money and the right amount of research was going to find how to make me better. Well, I had given up basically because I had tried every pill and everything. And that's where I was when I met Dr. Canale. And so you can imagine how foreign to me it sounded when the first time I met him, he said to me, you know, we each have within us this innate capacity for the body to heal itself. And he explained that our autonomic nervous system, which controls everything health-wise, can get out of balance. And we have this innate capacity to bring it back into balance. And I thought to myself, well, you know, my innate capacitator is broken, or it hates me because there ain't no healing going on in here. And I said to him, Dr. Paul, I've tried to get that thing back into balance. Yeah, I've tried everything. And then he said something to me that has stuck with me to this day, and it has become the cornerstone of my work as a unified therapist. He said, the only way out of pain and suffering is to go within. And I had no idea what he meant by that, but I knew that I had never gone there. I didn't know it was a place to go. And so I think because I was in give up mode and I so badly wanted my life back, I said, okay, well, let's do that. Let's go there. Let's go within. Let me try. So in that first session, I started to feel physical sensations in my body that were disconcerting and fascinating at the same time, because it was like temperature changes and feelings of like vibrations and buzzing, and it wasn't as dramatic as the video that we saw, but it was definitely, it caught my attention. And he explains to me, you know, this is normal. This is what the body does when it's balancing, when it's coming back in. And so I went home that day for the first time in 4 years with hope. And I continued to go back, and my physical symptoms disappeared pretty quickly. I would say within 3 to 4 weeks, I noticed a really big drop in my physical symptoms. And toward the end of that month, something else started to happen during the sessions. I would become aware of things that had happened to me in my childhood and my early adulthood and my adolescence. And it's not like I had blocked them out or had amnesia. I just had trudged on through my life without paying much attention and just accomplishing everything I need to accomplish. But all these emotions started coming to the surface along with these past experiences. And as I began to integrate them with his help, I noticed this beautiful two-way flow of communication started to happen. This is the best way that I can describe it. It felt like from my brain to my heart to my gut, everything was communicating with everything else, and it was bi-directional. So all the organs in my system were receiving and giving signals to each other. And I realized this is how our system is supposed to function. We have this beautiful communication system within us. And it is how it is supposed to function because it is one system. Just like a tree, the roots, the trunk, the trees and the branches, that's one system. We're the same. And yet so many of us go through life, and not everybody results in a chronic illness, but so many of us go through our life cut here, almost like a block between this communication that's supposed to flow our neurology to our physiology. It's one system, and we go and we live our lives as if it's two separate things. So this two-way communication, if I could, I'm gonna just try to sum it up from my perspective as a patient. This two-way communication is a result of a neurological shift. And that neurological shift gives way to a physiological change in the body, and that's where the healing states take place. And that went on for a few more months, and then I began to notice other things happening that nobody really explained were gonna happen. So I was completely caught off guard. But the first thing that I began to see about myself was that I had this widening sense of perception. And by that, I mean I had a deeper understanding of my psychology and my behavior patterns. But I also had a deeper understanding of why I was here in the world and what I was supposed to do. It had never really occurred to me before to search for that. I know some people get to a point in their lives and they say, I've got to find a purpose. Like, maybe I wasn't there yet, or maybe I never would have gotten there, I don't know. But in any event, I became more aware of what I'm doing here and what we're all doing here. And I also noticed that I was able to come away from my perspective, which was sometimes pretty narrow, and I could shift to someone else's perspective and the way they saw things. And I started to do that like automatically. I could shift to someone else's perspective pretty effortlessly, or even a group of people's perspective. And so that changed the way that I dealt with conflicting people, conflicting situations. I was better able to see where the other person was coming from. So my responses back to them were not the same as I used to. And so this, I think, is part of what was happening in my prefrontal cortex. A minute ago, Dr. Paul was talking about those 9 functions and also the development of those soft skills. That's what I started seeing happening in my life. I would have been happy with just the alleviation of the physical symptoms, but this was something that was very new. You know, probably one of the most important things is that I developed a heightened sense of compassion and empathy and unity with people. And I don't mean to say that I wasn't a nice person before, or that anyone who hasn't gone through these changes doesn't understand compassion and unity. What I'm talking about is from going through those changes and then helping other people go through them, I began to realize that we are all struggling with the same things. It comes down to just a few core things. Fear is one of them. Dr. Paul mentioned fear, a sense of unworthiness, a not good enough feeling. We all struggle with those. So I'm not able to go into a grocery store or a post office anymore without understanding that about people. And I feel connected in that way. So we all struggle with the same things, and we all have the same things available to us. Something else I learned. What became available to me was this ability to feel, and it was a physical sense in my body. The best way I can describe it, it was a deep feeling of love and peace and tranquility that came from a source beyond me, beyond my innate capacitator or my autonomic nervous system or my newfound health. It came from a source beyond me, and yet I understood that I had a little piece of that I carried in me. And this transcended any one religion. And it gave me a sense of spirituality that has stayed with me to this day and has transformed the way that I live my life and has really enabled me to learn how to do this work and help other people do it. And I'm so thrilled to be working with Dr. Paul, and I'm so grateful to him that he's been working for 30 years to not only study how this works, but to craft it and transform it into a therapy that can be accessible across the board to all of us. Because we don't need to look very far around us to see that a shift needs to happen. We just need to know how, and we need to have accessible tools that we can really begin to learn and digest and understand how this happens and how we can help as many people as possible to make these shifts, because that is definitely something that would be totally worth it. So thank you again for letting me speak and listening and being open to this discussion.
Paul invited me here today to share my story. I'm sure my story is not so different from many of your stories. Some people think it is when they hear it, but I think when we start opening up, we find out that there's a lot to relate to each other. When we start to feel a comfort, when we start to feel compassion from other people, and we can feel that others will listen to us and help us heal through our story. I'm going to begin my story before I was born, and I think this is important for us to realize that our stories all begin before we were born, but that doesn't have to make it our story. So I want to start with, when I'm telling you this as my story, that's not who I am. It's just the history of my life on this earth so far. I want to start my story in the 70s with my mother. She's here today. And my father. She met him in college, and they fell in love, and they got married. During their time of marriage, my mom dealt with a lot of abuse from my father. My father has a very troubled childhood as well. He was abused. He was the oldest male sibling of 13 siblings. He grew up in housing projects in New Orleans, Louisiana. My grandfather was a sailor. He was in the Navy. He was gone a lot. My grandmother struggled to raise them, and I know from the stories I hear from my family that it wasn't easy. I think that the patterns that we have with abuse, violence, they pass down only as patterns when we're unconscious of them. And my journey in life has led me to believe that we have to become conscious, and I hope to teach others to become conscious to break these patterns and to start new patterns of love. My father abused my mother very severely, and they had three children together. One of my sisters, she's older than me, she passed away in a car accident that my mother got into when she was leaving my father. This traumatized my mom, it traumatized my dad. They did try to work it out after that. During the time of trying to work it out, she became pregnant with me. My father didn't want to have any more children, so he told her to have an abortion. My mother could not do it. She didn't want to have an abortion. Thanks, Mom. So, I'm here today. Due to this decision, my father became very angry, beat her again several times, and she finally left my father. After I was born, she got a divorce. She moved in with my grandparents, her parents, and that's where I was raised for the first few years of my life. My grandfather, my mother's father, was my paternal figure in my life. And I remember him. My grandfather is a very structured Protestant German man who very by the book. I think I was kissing a girl when I was like 6 or 5 or something. And my grandfather brought me in the house and told me that it was a sin because I was married. And it was terrible. So you can imagine this growing up in that setting. My mother was, from all stories and accounts I hear from my family, was a very obedient daughter and an obedient woman. This led to her pattern with my father, not very outspoken and very quiet, very humble and caring. Shortly after I was 7, she remarried to my stepfather, and we moved from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, to a very small town called Random Lake, and I think at the time it was unincorporated with a population of like 1,500 people. It was a very rural town. We lived on an 81-acre farm, and me and my sister Ashley were the only 2 minorities in that area. My sister has a slightly darker tone than me, but I look slightly different, and I was raised to feel a little bit different in this community because most of them were Polish, German, descendants of immigrants. And during this time, I got beat up a lot, I got picked on a lot, and I would go home and cry and wonder why. I didn't know why I was different. But I knew I was different. They told me I was different. The teachers treated me different as well, and my mother would tell me just to be strong, be good, and get good grades. Very academic. I don't think my mother understood what it felt like to be in my skin. But as a child, I didn't know that. So I became very angry. My stepfather, he grew up in this area. He was also very abusive. But he was abusive to us as kids. He didn't abuse my mother. But my mother started to pick on if something was going on when I was having bruises all over me and my sister was having bruises. When I finish my story, some people might ask why I can sit here and look at my mom and tell her I love her. That's forgiveness. Okay? And forgiveness is important. And we have to remember that we don't forgive people, we forgive events. We forgive feelings. We forgive our responses to things that happen to us. And we forgive because we understand that others didn't know. And because they didn't know, they couldn't teach. And they had to go through this experience to know and teach. My stepfather physically abused us severely. He used to call me a nigger and a cotton picker. I didn't know what that was. Wasn't raised around that type of language. My grandparents on my mother's side had actually moved and retired to Ocala, Florida. They didn't really know what was going on. We used to go visit in the summertime. I think my mother was trying to deal with it the best way she could. She had 2 more children with my stepfather, so we had a household of 5. During this time, the school I went to wasn't very understanding of what was going on. This is a rural town. My stepfather was well known. Kind of just sweep it. Just keep moving. Who are these kids anyway? They're not even kids. Until I got into the 6th grade, there was a teacher named Mr. Milgrath. Came to school with a black eye. I was told not to go to school, but I went to school anyway. Something in me was a little resistant to those types of authorities that tell you to do the wrong thing. Mr. Milgrath looked at me and he brought me to the principal's office. I remember he told the principal, if you don't do something about this, I will. So, this is backwoods America. Everyone's crazy. I think Mr. Milgrath was planning on going to shoot my stepfather. The police got called, social workers came. Stepfather was arrested that day. They found out over time of multiple cases of abuse. There was a pattern. But he was released from jail. And we continued on living with him for a while. He may have been on probation, I'm not sure the criminal story, but it didn't really stop. I lived in fear. My sisters lived in fear of this man. He was very aggressive, but I think his story is he never had kids before us, and he didn't know how to raise kids. And we lived on a farm. We had horses, goats. We had to scoop up manure. We had to clean it up in the middle of winter. We had to bale hay. So we had to do a lot of manual labor, and this was just something that he grew up with, just go out there and do it. And he was an angry person himself, and I don't know the history behind it, but I do know that he had to heal, and maybe he still is. We don't speak. One day my sister came to me and she told me that my stepfather had been raping her for years. And I became very angry because all I knew is I had to protect my sisters. There were several times he used to beat us up, and I used to stop him, or tried to, and he beat me up too, but I just had to get in the way in between them. When my sister told me this, I said, what do you want me to do about it? And she said, I don't know, I just wanted to stop. My sister was a year older than me, but she was broken. Well, I went to school that day, and I told a couple of my friends that I already knew I was being abused. I wanted to kill him. Ironically, he's the one who taught me how to shoot a gun at the age of 7. And I knew where the guns were. So that day, I grabbed a .25 caliber pistol. It's not that big, but when you're 9 or 10 years old, it's kind of big. I don't think my mom knows the side of the story yet. I brought it to school, and 2 of my friends, I'm not going to say their names, and we were going to go home that day. One of my friends called his older brother, and we were going to shoot him. And one of my friends told his girlfriend about it. She told the principal, told the school counselor. And they pulled me into the office, and they asked me if I had a gun. And I said no. It was hidden in another locker. They asked me what's going on. And I told them what is happening. And they told me, you're not going to go home today. And the next thing I know, the police show up at school, and the social worker shows up. Her name was Mary Beth Hill, I believe. And at the time, she was somewhat of my savior. She made quite a discomfort for my family because, like most social workers are supposed to do, she started digging in. They put us into a foster home. And in this foster home, we lived for 9 months. And in this foster home, during that time, my stepfather went on trial, and he was convicted, and he went to prison. He was in prison for about 20 years. And he was convicted of child molestation and several other counts. During the time in the foster home, we lived in this group home. The family that brought us in, they also had issues. My sister couldn't sit on the couch. She was too dark. He didn't want her to get black on the couch. But I could. She made my sister envious of me. It made me confused. When I reported this, they denied it, and they said, we're searching for attention, we're abused, and that's what children do. And over time, we ended up moving out. The trial was over. My sisters and I could move back home, but I didn't want to move back home. I was angry. I was angry with my mother. I was angry because my mom allowed it to happen for so many years and did nothing, and I didn't know why. So I started hanging around with a crowd of kids that probably didn't have the best decisions, that stayed high most of the time. And for the next few years, I was in and out of group homes and juvenile detention for fighting, for running away. I lived with some of my friends. The parents were sympathetic to my sister's situation, and they let me stay there. But during those times, my mom didn't know where I was. She would call me and just run away, please find me, and they'd bring me in. I got to a point where I was headed towards what they call in Wisconsin, it's a military place called Wales, it's in north Wisconsin. And that was probably going to be my future. There was a man named Bill Perrin who ended up becoming my social worker. He did some discovery and he found my father. And he told my father my situation. Come to find out, my father lived about 45 minutes from me my whole life. He didn't look. When Bill Perrin found him, I'm not sure what the conversation was, but I'm sure it was a man-to-man conversation. I told my dad to buck up. So my dad came and picked me up from the group home in a drop-top black Mustang, and he had a cigarette in his mouth. He knocked on the door. He said, "Look for Peter Boutin." And the lady came and got me, and I came to the door. I had baggy pants on, a jersey, and a tattoo on my arm. And my dad's like, "Is that a tattoo?" Yeah. He goes, "The hell are you doing with that? Get in the car." You get in the car, I asked my dad if I could have a cigarette. He gave me a cigarette. 14 years old. Like, oh, this guy's pretty cool. So he lived in an area called Whitefish Bay, Wisconsin. And in Whitefish Bay, it's a very well-to-do neighborhood in Milwaukee. It's a suburb. And I went to high school there. It's a college prep school called Whitefish Bay High. Most of the kids there come from very good families, at least economically. And I was not used to that. I was uncomfortable. I felt like an imposter. And that started my journey of breaking my imposter syndrome that I've had, even into my adult life. in this school, I was challenged to do better than where I had come from. And I was challenged even by my father. And my father was okay as long as I had C's and I was passing. And living with him, I lived with him for about a year. He was a very angry person. His new wife, he also abused. I watched it. He drank a lot. And he blamed most of his life on somebody else. Whether it was his mother, his absence, he blamed it on my mother. And everything that happened to him thus far was, he was a victim of it. He's a Vietnam veteran. He did 4 combat tours. He's got Agent Orange growing up his leg, and spiritually broken. He's a good person at his heart, but when he drinks, he can't control his anger. His dark side comes out. And I want to say that cautiously because we all have those dark sides, but you have to have those to recognize light, and they go together. Soon after that, met my grandmother down in Louisiana, New Orleans, where my father's from. He brought me down to visit, and they looked at me and they said, "When you're ready, call us, because this ain't gonna last. Your dad's crazy." So while goes by, he takes me out. There's the state fair. My sister's with me. Also Ashley, who's my older sister, and he gets into an argument with my sister Ashley. I'm not sure the reason why, and he puts his hands on her, and I lose my mind. So I grab the knife. His wife calls the police. Police come, and when the police come, my father's very good at transforming. Boom. Hey, sir. Hey, officer. How are you? No. You know, my son's he's angry right now, and it turned into my pattern of bad behavior. The police arrested me, put me in the back of the police car, take me to another group home. I think I reached out to my mother or my grandmother. I can't remember. They worked it out. My grandmother adopted me. I moved down to Louisiana within a couple months. It changed my entire life. Moving from Wisconsin to Louisiana is a complete culture shock. It's a complete different America. And I had to take correspondence courses to go to school there because they didn't offer some of the classes that I had already been taking at Whitefish Bay. And the correspondence courses I took, I realized I learned this stuff in 6th grade. I'm a sophomore now. So I'm like, this is going to be easy. I breezed my way through high school in Louisiana. And hence why I'm a huge advocate for standardized SM education, because my family's very proud that I grew up at the top of my class and graduated, but it wasn't hard for me because most of the stuff that he taught me I already learned 3 years prior in Wisconsin. My family in Louisiana, they're not very well to do. There's a lot to be said about nihilism and the loss of hope and realizing when you don't have something that you can have it. But most people believe they can't have something and they stay that way for the rest of their lives, and generations after generations there's a pattern. I knew that there was something different than what I had there, and I needed to see what it was. And I decided I was going to have a happy life. My grandmother, Dolores Boutan, was the one who brought me into her house and raised me, and she became a mother figure to me, and she taught me what love was, and she taught me what family was. And I learned also from my aunts and uncles that when they were younger, she had been abusive, but with me, the grandchild, she spoiled me. And I said, how could she have been like that? She loved me so much. But I knew that there's something to that. I need to look into it. And I was always a curious person. I decided when I was getting closer to graduating that I wanted to join the military. I wanted to be a Marine like my brother. My brother was in the First Gulf War, and I wanted to be like him. My grandmother forbid it. I wanted to do an early enlistment. She said, no, I don't want you going off to the military and coming back and being a drunk and a womanizer. You're going to do something with your life. You're going to go to school. But I knew that going to college, I was going to put a burden on my family economically, and I would probably have to stay at home. And I didn't want to do that. I needed to see something different. So actually, as the tables turned, I joined the Air Force. Upon enlisting in the Air Force, my first duty station was in Las Vegas, Nevada. When I got the orders there, I didn't know where Nellis Air Force Base was, but I knew everyone was trying to swap me for orders at the base I was at. And I was like, this is weird. So I went and talked to my training leader, and I said, where's Nellis? He said, dude, that's in Las Vegas. You need to go. It's going to be awesome. So when I got to Las Vegas, I was 19 years old. And when you're a junior enlisted guy in the military, you don't make that much money, but it seems like a lot of money. So every few weeks, you got about $500 in your pocket, and you go out and spend it and you have fun. But not too long after that, they said, hey, we need you to go to Saudi Arabia. And I was curious. This is in the year 2000. I said, okay, I'll go. I got to Saudi Arabia, And growing up in all Christian homes and various denominations, Baptist, Catholic, and Christian, that's another story. I got there, and I would wake up every morning and you'd hear these prayers, and they'd come over the sand dunes. And it sounds beautiful. You don't know what it is, but it's pretty. And I grew in love with that sound, and I decided to look it up. What are they saying? And they're praying, they're praising God and saying how great He is, how wonderful He is, and His love, and His benevolence, and His strength. And all these things that we give to a deity in every one of our faiths, the core values are the values that we want to have inside of us, that we want to share with others. So I started bringing that home inside of my head and doing what we call the inner work, and saying I want to be a better person. But I was angry. I was still angry with my family. I was still angry with my siblings. I was still angry with everyone that allowed these things to happen to us, until I realized over time that these things happened. They don't happen to us, they just happen. And it's up to us to decide what we do with it, our response to it. During the time I was in the Air Force, one of the deployments I did was in Iraq. 2007, September 11th. A significant event happened. I was working in an area called Camp Victory, and there was a palace there called Al Faw Palace, which significantly on the news, they are now turning that to American University. But it was one of our headquarters in Iraq. It was a huge military headquarters. That is where the Commanding General's office was and what we supported. I did in most of my time in the military, I was in the intelligence and operations community, so we were doing some stuff over there, and a lot of things go on. There were some shootings, bombs would go off, VBIDs, and one day I was about to walk out to the bathroom. The building meeting didn't have an indoor bathroom. We had to go to Porta Johns outside. And one of my buddies stopped me. He said, "Hey, I need to show you something." So I stopped by his desk, looking at his computer, and the next thing I know, something loud happened. And then the next thing I opened my eyes, I'm laying on the ground. And I look back, the windows have been blown out. The guy that was showing me something is on the ground, and I can't hear a thing. One of the other soldiers comes and grabs me, because we were in a joint environment. It was an Army soldier, and I just hear him grab me and say, "Come with me." So I get up, and I just follow him. I don't know what's going on. I go outside. Some people were running to the scene. They had fired over the wire 120 millimeter rocket, Iranian rocket. The blast radius had knocked me to the ground, blown out all the windows within probably about an eighth of a mile. And car alarms going off, and people running and screaming. Within the parking lot, there were a couple bodies there. It was a pretty gruesome scene. And what you need to do in these situations is react. You learn to just react. Now, this wasn't the first explosion I've been in. It's just the first one that had come so close. And as I was walking back into the building after things started to settle, I realized that the Porta John I was going to go to was split in half. And I wasn't in it. That freaked me out more than the explosion did, because I said, "Damn, I should have been dead," but I'm not. When these things happen, you start to realize there must be something greater, and there must be something for you. And there must be something that you have to give to others. And as time went on, I did a few more deployments in the military, and I got out. When I got out of the military, I had an option. I was going to go back to college, or I was looking at a job opportunity. I took a job opportunity as a defense contractor back in Iraq. Crazy. After you think these things happen, why would I go over there? Well, in hindsight and in reflection to myself, I realized that I was doing all of these things. I was making all these decisions to deploy, and I was living over there. I lived in Iraq, and I did time in the Middle East over 10 years within my 20s. From the age of 20 until 31, I did about 10 years in the Middle East. I stayed there because I had what we call deployment syndrome. A lot of us have it. I had this syndrome because it was so chaotic over there. It was so mad that it made my upbringing and my life at home that I didn't want to deal with seem like fairy dust. And I didn't have to deal with it. Instead, I just needed to focus. I needed to drive forward. And I thought I dealt with everything when I was a kid. It's all over. I'm happy. I'm good to go. Until I tried to move back home to the States, and I couldn't deal with it. And I thought, I got PTSD from war. Got it. I'll just go see some counselors. I'll talk to some of the guys that have it. I'll start joining groups. I was part of a fraternal organization, Freemasons. A lot of us shared these stories and helped each other. I went through that journey to find some enlightenment. And there is enlightenment to find in it, but it didn't give me all the answers I needed, that I was looking for. It just wasn't clicking. Something wasn't connecting. And I went back over again. I took one last job in the Middle East, and I worked at the U.S. Embassy in Kuwait. And during that time, I realized that I wasn't angry with everyone else. I wasn't angry at anything. I was just angry. And I was angry because I had PTSD from my whole life. And I had to heal from that. And I had to come from that. And I dealt with others with similar situations. I said, I want to fix me so I can fix others. And I can't be too much longer. We gotta shorten the time. But I will tell you that after moving back to Miami, we decided I'm gonna lock myself here and I'm not gonna deploy again. I turned down jobs. Guys wanted me to come over there because I can adapt in those environments and I can excel. I said, I'm going to come here and I'm going to excel in life, but I want to do something different. I want to be happy. And I met some people in a couple of circles. I started going to meditation and started doing yoga. I met some folks who said, hey, I got invited to come do ayahuasca one day, and I heard about it. I said, well, let me go see what this is about. I had no idea. I said, I'm not going to do any research. I'm just going to go do it. And the first experience I had was beautiful. It was beautiful. It was angelic. The second experience I had, it was hell. Because what this medicine does, it doesn't heal you. The only thing can heal you is you. It helps you get there. It opened up some doors. It opened up my mind to realize that there's something in me. There was an anger and there was a fear that I had to overcome. I thought I wasn't afraid of death. Until you feel like dying and you know, I feel like I'm going to die now. And you get closer with these people in this community. And some of those people said, you should meet Paul. You should work with Paul because you need to integrate what you're learning from these plant medicines into your life because these aren't all the answers. So what we need to bring in our community not only is healing, we have to bring forgiveness and we have to bring integrity. We have to bring integrity with ourselves. We have to bring integrity with others. And we have to be able to talk about these things and feel comfortable about it. A lot of guys that I work with, they're a suit and tie environment. A couple of them are sitting here right now. In my opinion, the corporate environment that we work in, there's a saying that says, don't bring your feelings to work, just bring your thoughts. Well, everything that we have in every environment we work in has to do with feelings, has to do with emotions. So now they're teaching leaders about emotional intelligence. And my job, where I work, is to help leaders develop and build teams, and keep pressing them forward and motivating them. And the best way to do that is get in tune with them and listen and touch on their feelings and make them feel comfortable and talk about those things. So when they make the decisions, we're not thinking about just about money. We're not thinking about just a resource. We're thinking about the people that need to make the mission happen. And here, our mission has to be healing. And that's why I'm here, and that's why I'm talking. And I want to thank Paul, Amy, Stacy, and everyone, my brothers and sisters who are listening and have this platform to speak. And I hope to meet you all again soon.
Thank you so much. I would like to take questions, but I know we're way overdone. But I want you to know that if you're interested in exploring this further, Peter, myself, Amy, will be doing this workshop. There's the details. There's some cards up here. If you're interested. Excuse me, Stuck.
There's a typo.
There's a typo.
305, not 321.
Wow.
321, boom.
Wow, 305. 305. Thank you, Dr. Stacy.
We are here in Miami, so 305 area code.
There's a bunch of cards here. You can call that too if you want, or you know somebody else. Highly recommend. It's a day
Why
where
don't
you
you
can really
pass
connect.
out your cards so they don't have to go
Okay,
upstairs?
we'll pass them out. Here we go. Dr. Stacy, pass them out. Thank you. All right, if you have any questions, you can come up and ask me now if you want. But the official program is over. Thank you so much for coming.